Welcome back. This is Bedtime Stories, Grownup Edition, Season 2 of Concrete Jungle. We're calling this Unfinished Business. If you're new here, my suggestion is that you at least watch Season 1 of Concrete Jungle. But if you've got time, I really suggest that you go back and watch the entire series of Bedtime Stories, as there is just way too much to recap. In the introduction, Regina had a conversation with Michelle Amora Thomas at the conclusion of 8 a.m. service, and Angela, Miss Brenda, and the children arrived to the church for 11 a.m. service, where Miss Brenda suggested that Angela utilize children's church so that they could enjoy service. Now, we all know that Angela is very particular about who she leaves her children with. After that whole episode with Jessica, she's a little gun-shy as it pertains to babysitters and the like. But knowing that Pastor Corey has background checked the volunteers in children's church and she's going to be on the premises, she agrees to let the children go to children's church. Angela learned all about the programs that are offered to the children. The children are separated by age groups, and they're provided with age-appropriate content that's in line with the message of the service for the day. Melissa is with the 7 and 8-year-old group. Although she's nonverbal, she's obviously hearing, and she has her iPad that helps her to communicate with those who do not know ASL. So Angela is comfortable with leaving the children. It just so happens that Melissa is in Michelle's group. This group gets to watch the worship service projected on the wall. They also get to watch a pre-recorded sermon adapted for their age group at the same time that the pastor is up in the pulpit giving the sermon to the rest of the church. This week's message is about David being anointed to be king. The pastor crafted a message about how even the smallest child and the youngest child can be the child that God chooses to lead a nation, a family, or a group, and that being smaller or younger doesn't mean that you don't have power. Pastor talked about how children can pray for their families and how Jesus told the people to let the small children come to him. Melissa was so moved by the sermon that she began to cry. Meanwhile, Angela and Miss Brenda were enjoying Pastor Corey's sermon for the adults. Pastor Corey asked that if anyone needed prayer, that they come to the front now. Suddenly, the doors to the sanctuary opened and Melissa came running down the aisle. Angela stood up to go behind her, and immediately thereafter, Michelle came running into the sanctuary. As Melissa approached the pulpit, Pastor Corey put his hands up, telling Angela and Michelle not to stop her. Pastor Corey came down from the pulpit, approached Melissa, bent down to her eye level, and whispered something in her ear that Angela couldn't hear. From her vantage point, she couldn't tell if Melissa was saying something or signing, and she couldn't hear what Pastor Corey was saying to Melissa in response because he had put the microphone down. She could see was that Melissa had her hands raised to the ceiling, and Pastor Corey's armor bearer had applied anointing oil to his hands, and he had applied his hands to Melissa's head. Michelle had walked over to Angela, apologizing fervently. "I'm so sorry. I went to grab a tissue because she was crying, and before I could turn around, she was running out of the door. Had to grab one of the assistants before I could come after her because I couldn't leave the other children. Kids run so fast, I don't even know how she got all the way over here so quickly." Miss Brenda said, "Baby, when a child is on a mission, there's nothing you can do to stop them." When Pastor Corey finished praying, Melissa turned around, found Angela, smiled, waved, and ran over to her, giving her a huge hug. Angela said, "Baby, you know you should never leave. When I leave you someplace, you need to stay there." Melissa nodded her head and signed, "I'm sorry." Angela said, "Now apologize to Miss Michelle." Melissa signed, "I'm sorry. Hey, love." And Angela was confused because that last part didn't look like Michelle to her. Before Angela could even ask Melissa or Michelle about the sign, she got a text message. She leaned over to Miss Brenda and said, "Can you go get Angel? We need to get to the hospital. Regina just texted me. Q is awake." When Angela, Miss Brenda, and the children get to the hospital, Regina, LJ, and Donovan are in the family waiting room. Regina tells Angela to go ahead to Q's room, despite the fact that his parents are in the room with him. Angela is extremely nervous. She has butterflies in her stomach. She's nauseous. She feels like she's gonna faint. She doesn't know if she is coming or going. This is the first time that she's gonna lay eyes on Q conscious in 2.5 years. She lightly taps on his hospital room door, and then she hears the Queen Mother say, "Come in." She pushes the door open, and all eyes are on her. She makes eye contact with Q. She sees him attempt to smile around the tube that's down his throat. As she walks towards the bed, he lifts up his arm and reaches towards her. His parents step aside. Angela walks over to the bed, and unable to control herself, she drops to her knees, puts her head on his lap, and just cries. Q lifts his hand, strokes her hair, and through her sobs, she says, "Thank you, God." She hears the door open behind her, so she starts to stand up, and when she turns around, she sees that it's the respiratory technician coming in to extubate him. Once the tube is removed, the respiratory technician wipes his lips and applies some Vaseline, and as she attempts to walk away, Q grabs her arm. He looks at her and with a scratchy voice says, "Teeth." She looks a little confused, and Miss Bella says, "He wants you to brush his teeth, baby." The respiratory technician chuckles and goes and gets one of those little ugly sponge things that really doesn't brush much of anything and some toothpaste. As the respiratory technician brushes his teeth and his tongue, Miss Bella looks at her husband and says, "We should probably go." Angela, slightly confused about why Q would be concerned about his breath at a time like this, just stood by and watched. When the respiratory technician left the room, Q reached up for Angela's hand, and she gave him her hand. He pulled her closer to him and did the "come here" motion, and she leaned down, thinking that he wanted to say something to her. She got closer to his face. He took his free hand, wrapped his fingers around the back of her neck, pulled her face to his, and gave her the deepest, most passionate kiss she ever had from a man laying in a hospital bed in her life. As the kiss ended, he whispered in his raspy voice, "Long time, no see." They both laugh, and Angela goes in for a second kiss. Then she says, "I guess this means you plan to live." His answer was to do this again and get another kiss. As they enjoy their third kiss, the nurse enters the room to discuss recovery plans with Q. Angela says, "One moment, is it okay if I go and get his family? I think they need to hear this." The nurse says, "No problem, I'll wait." Angela then goes into the family waiting room to collect the family, and they all return to Q's room. The nurse explains that Q will need extensive rehab. He's going to require around-the-clock care, and the easiest option will be for him to go to a rehabilitation center. He can go home, but only if the family can provide him with 24-hour care, which is very difficult for any family to do. Not only would they need to provide for his physical needs, but they would also have to have someone come in to provide for his medical needs, his physical therapy, and so on. Angela looked around the room at the family, and although she was a little nervous and felt like she might be overstepping, she just couldn't help herself. She blurted out, "Oh no, he's going home with me." She then pulls back a little, looks at Miss Bella and says, "Of course, if that's okay with you." Miss Bella says, "Oh baby, if it's fine with him, it's fine with me too." Angela looks at Q, and Q says, "Give us a minute, please." The room clears out, and Angela looks at Q and says, "Listen, if you have somebody else who you'd rather," Q grabbed her hand and squeezed and said, "There's nobody else." Angela says, "Well, I can understand as a man, it might be a lot to have a woman taking care of you, but I promise I will make sure that you have everything that you need, and I will ensure that your dignity is maintained." He looked at Angela and said, "I don't want to be a burden, baby." Angela said, "A burden? You were there for me in ways that you absolutely did not have to be. Most of what you did was outside of your job description, and it's not just about reciprocity. I'm here because I want to be. I dropped everything, brought my children, and Mom Brenda here because I care about you and I want to be here to support you. My Dallas house is a sprawling estate similar to the one I had in Denver. There's plenty of room for you there, and you're under no obligation to continue whatever this is between you and I beyond me helping you. You looked at Angela and said, I don't want to live with a woman. You know that. Angela said, and like I said, it's a sprawling property. We will not be living together. You will be staying at my house while you get the care that you need. Now, I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm offering to be a blessing to you simply because I care. There's no obligation on your part. Q said, you're not an obligation, baby. Loving you is a choice that I'm willing to make over and over again. Angela said, well, let me call Jeffrey so I can make all the arrangements. She walked out of the room and found the family pressed up against the door trying to ear hustle on the conversation. She let them know that everything was settled and Q would be staying at her estate in Dallas. She walked over to the nurse's station and let the nurse know where she could send all of the information so that Jeffrey could get everything aligned, and then she made that phone call to Jeffrey to get everything set up. Then she went to the family waiting room to bring Miss Brenda, Regina, and LJ up to speed. When the St. James family entered Q's room, Donovan had to be his usual self. He started making jokes about how Angela was thicker than a Snicker, about how she moved heaven and earth to get there to see Q, about how Q always has all the ladies fawning over him and tripping over themselves trying to take care of him. And then he started taking those little personal digs. You know those digs that people take when they're in silent competition with you, but you didn't know and you're not participating in the competition, but somehow you're still winning. He said, well, I guess you ready for a ready-made family. She got 2 kids already, bro. Then he said, and then she just came in here taking over. The Queen Mother was having none of it. She said, Donovan, cut it out. You should be focused on the fact that your brother survived. This man had surgery on his heart and his lungs. He is requiring round-the-clock care. How about you thank God that he survived and that he has someone who's willing to be there for him? Jealousy is a sickness, and you need to get help.